Good evening and welcome to the Toronto Debating Society. It's Tuesday, September 25th. The resolution for tonight is public transit within the GTA should be free. And to start the debate, please help me welcome the Prime Minister, Gerry, who will speak for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the opposition. The proposition before us, as the Speaker has said, public transportation within the GTA should be free. I'm going to first start by defining some terms of the proposition. By public transportation, we mean a shared passenger transportation system available to the public. Within, inside, the GTA, the usual term, City of Toronto, parts of the 4 outlying regions, Halton, Peel, York, and Durham. By free, we mean with no fare box charge. Ladies and gentlemen, most debaters give 3 arguments in their talk. However, this debate lends itself to just 2 main arguments, which I call the why and the how. I will mainly deal with the why. My colleague will deal with the how. Why do we need free public transit? Number 1 reason is to get people out of their cars. Would Toronto be the first to do this? Not even close. Over 40 US towns and cities, 13 towns and cities in France and 6 in Czechoslovakia, including the city of Prague for over a 2-year period. Many other European towns and cities have had free transit for 10 or more years, including the town of Hasselt in Belgium, where ridership increased 13 times since 1997 when it was begun. Cost is not just measured in dollars, as the following examples will show. I will now give 8 arguments to show why Toronto must move towards public transportation and away from private vehicles as the main transit mode. My first argument. A 2002 study by the Brookings Institute shows that public transit uses about half the fuel that private vehicles use, meaning cars, taxis, etc. In this era of seemingly decreasing supply of fuel and certainly increasing prices, we must make a move to more efficient means of transportation. Point number 1. Number 2, public transit is far safer. A study in the US showed that in an average year, 200,000 deaths could be averted if public rather than private vehicles were used. Canada is no different. Over 15,000 deaths could be saved if we used mainly public transportation. That's point number 2. Number 3, there would be less pollution, less road maintenance, and far fewer traffic jams if we used public transportation. A US study carried out in Illinois found that a city that used mainly public transportation can reduce CO2 emissions by 30 to 40%. If we are truly interested in our environment, we must move people out of their cars and move in this direction. That's point number 3. My fourth argument. An important social role played by public transit is to ensure that all facets of society, the old, the poor, the young, not just those people holding driver's licenses or with access to private vehicles, are able to travel. A free transit system makes High Park, the Scarborough Bluffs, the Don Valley, Science Center, countless other places available for all of these people, not just the privileged. That's point 4. My next point. Another US study found that 18 cents out of every dollar is spent on transportation, an amount of about $9,000 for an average family. In these difficult recessionary times, there are very few families who would argue with saving $9,000 if transit was free. That's point 5. My next argument. Free public transit reduces passenger aggression. According to the TTC, 95% of transit aggression occurs at the turnstiles. No turnstiles, no aggression. That's score point number 6 for free public transit. Another point, but not a small one. If public transit was free, Higher density housing in cities would be possible and encouraged. This would mean a reduction of the suburban auto sprawl that we see surrounding most towns and cities. Less auto miles would be driven with an obvious savings in fuel, emissions, etc. Also, we would see a reduction in the loss of our decreasing open space. That's point number 7. Point number 8. If I can find it. The Toronto Board of Trade, and this will blow people away, has said that Toronto has the longest commute in the world. And further, that over $6 billion is lost each year due to traffic congestion. Remember that number, $6 billion. My colleague will speak of that later on. So, ladies and gentlemen, you may ask, who will pay for this loss of fares and the increased infrastructure needed? Remember that $6 billion that was lost due to traffic jams. My colleague, as I said, will speak about that further. These 8 arguments, these 8 arguments that I have made, some talk about why the transit system has to be free. Some just argue that we need a public transit system rather than private vehicles. But as I said, all will be brought into light when my colleague makes his comments. But the bottom line is we must get people out of their cars. We have to get people out of their cars for safety, financial, environmental, all the reasons I've stated. Ladies and gentlemen, free transit is the answer for Toronto. Thank you.
Thank you to Gerry, our Prime Minister. Next to speak is the Leader of the Opposition. Please help me welcome Margie, the Leader of the Opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Adjudicator, that was a lovely outline of why public transportation is important, why transit in the GTA is important, why more people should take transit. It didn't explain why it should be free. So I'm going to discuss that very topic and why it shouldn't be free, reminding you that we agree with the definition, that free happens to be no box fare. It doesn't mean it materializes out of thin air. Something's paying for this. It's just not box fares anymore. Which opens up a world of hurt, actually. And my partner will go into some of the greater details about that, since the Prime Minister didn't spend a lot of time talking about the funding. But there is a bit of a dilemma in that situation, because as more people join the system, the more expensive it gets, and yet you've cut out a major portion of your funding. What was implied by the Prime Minister, although it wasn't actually said, was that making transit free will get people out of their cars and using transit. And then, again, many discussions of why transit is good. We don't dispute that transit is good. Transit is good. However, in actuality, the problem that has happened is that the targeted group, the people in the cars, that you want to get out of the cars to lessen congestion, they don't do this on the basis of fare. And while there have been fare-free policies in many places, as stated, including this lovely town in Belgium, which is a tiny little town, very small square area, it's worked very well in small towns, in rural areas, but that's not what we're discussing. We're discussing transit in the GTA, and it has been an enormous failure in implementing fare-free situations for an entire transit system in any large metropolitan area. It has not lasted, it has not worked, it has brought a host of problems. There have been very definite differences. So when you hear about fare free in a large metropolitan area, you're going to hear about how it went, not how it's going. So for example, there was a fare free demonstration in both Trenton and Denver. So we're talking nice, comparable sized areas, not little towns in Belgium. And they tried the off-peak fare experience between 1979 and 1980. And they had an increase in ridership, but they didn't really plan for that increase in ridership, so there were problems. There were problems with the schedule, there were problems with rowdiness, there were problems with overcrowding. And after a while, they started to realize maybe this wasn't the best approach, and they discontinued it in less than a year. Okay? Austin, Texas also tried this experiment. They made it from October 1989 to December 1990, so a little more than a year. Completely fare-free, again. It had a clearly higher ridership. Again, the problem, which I'll come to in a moment, is who comprised that ridership. And management reported problems, particularly with young passengers and maintenance issues. And bus operators asked that it be discontinued, and the board agreed. Another report on this said there was a near mutiny by the people forced to run the transit on the front lines. So the problem here is that these experiments did not get our targeted group on transit. They did not get people who were using cars into transit. Why? Because price is actually not the main reason people who have cars don't take transit. It's already more expensive to drive a car than it is to take transit. There are a bunch of other reasons. One is their concern for safety. One is their concern for frequency and reliability. I have kids, I need to be able to get home. Or even the time it takes. It would take me an hour on the TTC, it takes me half an hour by car. It's just more comfortable. And they find the TTC or the GO or any of the public transportation tends to elicit a visceral response in these people. It's crowded. It's unsafe. It's unreliable. It's, I don't want to mess with it. Those people are not enticed into the system by lower fares. Who is enticed into the system? Because ridership does go up. Well, it's been an interesting group. Apparently, it's mostly young people who like to kind of ride the rails all day and all night, and there's a commensurate increase in vandalism and hooliganism that cause real safety concerns, cause major maintenance issues, and then you have to start hiring extra security to manage that. And the system also becomes a de facto homeless shelter. So a lot of what were termed uneloquently in the study as vagrants will take great advantage of the system, which is understandable, but is again not moving your car-driving people into the system. There has been no demonstration in a large metropolitan area that a free system gets people out of their cars and into the transit. Might happen in smaller areas, doesn't happen in the large areas, and then the penalties for actually implementing the system tend to get out of control. Everybody drops it. So we're going to suggest that if you want to get people into cars, that's a different discussion, or out of cars. If you want to get people out of cars and into transit, then you start talking about things like road tolls. You talk things about increasing parking fees. You talk about gas taxes. Those are the things. Increasing reliability, increasing safety, making it less crowded. Those are all the things that make people interested in taking transit. Fare cost, way down the list. And when you come to the poorer people, they're the ones who are already taking it, right? So you're not getting any advantage there in terms of social justice. So we're going to suggest that, as far as we can tell, we have yet to hear an argument for why public transit in the GTA should be free.
Thank you to the leader of our opposition, Margie. Next to speak for 5 minutes will be the government secretary, Dee.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, members of the opposition, we've heard arguments about the fact that apparently we don't have arguments as to why public transit should be free in the GTA. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have made arguments about why public transit should be free. And I'd like to address, before I start with the arguments, I'd like to address some of the points raised by the leader of the opposition. And the idea that people don't leave their cars for free transit. It's been a failure, that apparently communities have tried it for 1 year, gave up after a year or whatever. Ladies and gentlemen, 1979 fuel prices were way, way, way lower than what they were in terms of today's dollars. And the systems that were in place were less comprehensive than they are today as well. People want to get around and get to work and get to play in the easiest, fastest, and cheapest ways possible. Now, an argument can be made, I suppose, if you're a driver, that, well, it's faster and easier for me to get there and whatever. Ladies and gentlemen, as my colleague stated, we have the worst commute times in the world right now. 80 minutes. 30 days of your life every year is spent in your car getting to and from work. Every year. So ladies and gentlemen, if that's not motivation enough to get you out of your car, absolutely you're not getting out of it, ladies and gentlemen. But there will come a point when you will decide, this is nuts. I'm sitting here burning gas, I'm wasting my time, I'm getting angry and frustrated. Everybody else around me is getting angry and frustrated. So what can I do? Well, ladies and gentlemen, transit is an option. In the GTA, it has been a long, slow process because there has been no federal funding or provincial funding to any extent. Mike Harris cut it, 1996. We have not had any funding, 2009, 10, or 11, in Toronto for public transit from those levels of government. They need to speak up for the constituents and say to the constituents driving their cars, your taxes are going up, people. You will pay one way or another so that public transit is beneficial to all, including you, because it gets people out of their cars and into the transit system and off the roads. And therefore, it can be free. Car drivers have been getting a free ride for far, far, far too long, ladies and gentlemen. In the United States, $3 trillion is actually used to subsidize car drivers by the federal government in that country. So if you use a similar amount for the 35-odd, 40 million people in Canada, that's a large amount of money relative to the gross national product of the country. So ladies and gentlemen, government has to take a role in it so that public transit can be free, encouraging people to use it. It does not cost a lot of money. $126 will get you a monthly pass on the TTC. The city is the same size as it was, and there are people who can travel across the city faster by transit than there are by car. And sure, there are the opposite as well. Depends where you have to go. It is up to the city, through the province and the federal government funding, to encourage more funding of public transit. The $6 billion the Toronto Board of Trade indicates is real dollars. It's lost. Businesses should be encouraging their staff to use public transit. They should be giving them free passes to come to work, to encourage them to get off the roads, ladies and gentlemen. The upkeep of the streets to the taxpayer is in the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. $5,000 per kilometer per lane to pave roads in the city. If you took the money that is spent, that $6 billion, and put it, the Toronto Transit Commission uses $1.45 billion as capital operating costs per year. So you've got 3.5 to 4 times that amount right there being wasted. Take that money and put it to making public transit free. Ladies and gentlemen, your expectations.
Thank you to the government seconder, Dean. The next person to speak will be the opposition seconder, Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the government, ladies and gentlemen, we've heard some arguments from the government side about why they think that public transit should be free. And I'll address three of the topics that actually the member of the government had just told you. Firstly, we have the worst commuting times in the country. That is correct, and that is directly from Statistics Canada. The average commute one way by car is 29 minutes. The average commute by public transit, 49 minutes. So by asking people to say public transit is the way to go because wasting time in a car, it actually takes much longer in a two-way commute by public transit. And that leads to what the leader of the opposition mentioned, it's inconvenience, which is the primary reason people don't take public transit. It's not the cost. The cost is minimal because parking downtown, $150 to $450, that already costs more than the $126 that the Prime Minister mentioned. So cost is not the issue at heart. Secondly, the need for provincial and federal support. What they're arguing for there is a different tax structure. Now, this isn't a realistic kind of proposal to say, oh, we'll just ask the provincial government for more money. How are they actually going to fund this if we're going to lose the revenue from fare boxes? And that totals $1 billion a year from the TTC. So out of the $1.4 billion budget, $1 billion comes from the revenue that we have as it is. So if we take that out, TTC is the responsible of the municipality. All of a sudden, Toronto has $1 billion hole. And we're arguing against 5-cent fare increases, which is, in the tens of millions. This is $1 billion. The only way to fund this is through property tax increases, because 39% of the budget comes from property taxes, 20% comes from provincial funding, and 15% comes from user fees, largely being the fare box revenue that we're getting. So we're taking that away, increasing property taxes for everyone. That's how it would realistically be funded. And it works out approximately to be about $690 per household. That's the immediate jump if we take out the fare box, because it's not free at the end of the day. Someone has to pay for it, and this is a municipal cost. Thirdly, the $6 billion in congestion costs. Well, that number, if you actually if you dive into the details, it says the costs were estimated only in the 9 largest urban areas, only at rush hour, only for cars, which is fine, and only included the driver's wasted time and excess fuel consumption. So if we're talking about the driver's wasted time, as I had highlighted before, it wastes even more time to take public transit. So this $6 billion of wasted cost due to congestion, well, the public transit doesn't solve it because people spend even more time on that. Now, in speaking of the target market, which the leader of the opposition had mentioned. So overall, in the system that we have now with public transit, we wanted to say that it was inclusive. So we assumed that the low income are already using public transit because the cars would be more expensive, cost prohibitive possibly. So if we have the entire city, each household pay an equal share of $690 of property taxes, well, if we add more ridership, that increases the operating expenses. And if the expenses go up, property taxes for all go up. So essentially, the more riders we get, which are middle income, the more everyone has to pay, including the low income. So we're actually having low income subsidize middle income costs of increasing this ridership in public transit. So therefore, the inclusiveness of having the low income, everyone being able to use it, they can use it now, but right now, the way we have it structured is the fare box covers the cost, so we don't have to increase and put this tax on everyone, even those who may not use it, including those low income who don't use it, who may not use it. And the examples of of the cases where it has been implemented, the town that actually I did look up this town of Hasselt in Belgium, and the population there is 72,000 people compared to 6 million in the GTA. The size, it's 102 square kilometers, whereas the GTA is 7,124 square kilometers. This is clearly not comparing apples to apples because that small of a transit system, it has 7 buses. So comparing that to what we have in Toronto and saying that we can move this system over here is just not realistic. So from that, we should not have
That concludes the first part of the debate, and now we're going to have the summations. The first summation at 2 minutes will be by the leader of the opposition, who would be Dean.
No,
No,
that would be
that
Margie.
would be Margie. My apologies.
Oh, it really doesn't. Okay. Well, everybody, we're going to point out, just at the end here, that there are several points that we're not arguing. We're not arguing that congestion is bad. We're not arguing that people should take transit. We're not even contradicting the idea that more funding should be provided to the TTC. We're saying public transit within the GTA should not be free. Okay? So that's a whole different question. And the main implication is that public transportation being free would address those other concerns tangentially. It would deal with the congestion, and people would take more transit, and there would be more funding. And the answer is that doesn't seem to be the case. When transit is made free in large urban areas, the people that we would target, the people who are driving the cars, that we want to get out of the cars and onto the public transit, don't do it. They don't do it now when it's cheap, and they don't do it in future when it's free. Because cost is not the incentive to get them there. We can discuss in another debate what the incentive would be to get the car drivers onto the TTC, but free ain't it. And then secondly, we put forth the idea that this then creates a nightmare funding problem for the TTC. Ridership will go up, not because that target group is joined, but because more destructive groups are starting to ride. Hooliganism goes up, crime goes up, vandalism goes up, it'll cost more, you have more overcrowding, now you need more money. Where is that even coming from? Because it's not tied to ridership anymore, because the fares have gone away. So we're suggesting that although it is always well intended to say we're going to make it free, it always has these unintended consequences and doesn't have the intended consequences. Therefore, we say no to the proposition.
Thank you to the leader of the opposition, Margie. And now we're going to hear for 2 minutes from the Prime Minister, Gerry.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, members of the opposition. We must get people out of their cars. For all of the reasons that the opposition has agreed to and that I have stated, we must get people out of their cars. There are only 2 ways you're going to do that. Perhaps 3. I just try them out maybe. But number 1, we must have a better transit system, obviously. So we need increased infrastructure. And we must make transit free. People are not going to get out of their cars unless we make it totally favorable. We must increase the better way to the best way. We must, provide the best system of getting to and from wherever you're going in Toronto. That will only happen with a really free and better improved transit system. But we have to do this. It doesn't matter what the cost is. $6 billion in lost congestion, 15,000 deaths, twice the fuel usage in private vehicles, pollution galore. People love their cars. We have to get them out of them. The only way we can is with a free transit system and a better infrastructure. My partner has said we can use part of that savings from the $6 billion. This would, with a better system, that $6 billion will shrink to 3 or 2 or whatever. That money then would be available, as my partner has said. We can equal the fare box number, 1.45 billion, and you've got 1.55 billion left to improve the infrastructure. It doesn't matter what the cost is. We must get people out of their cars. This is the old way, not the better way. Thank you very much.
And that's the end of our debate. And now we're going to hear from our adjudicator, Jim, who will speak 7 minutes on what his conclusion was.
Whatever it is. 10 minutes. Anyone would like that? 3 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. There you go, madam. Okay. An interesting evening. I'm not sure I'd call it an interesting debate. It had the seeds of its discontent sown in the actual topic itself. We had the one I always hate, should be free, and the government identified some elements of a debating process. Now, what the Prime Minister managed to do was say that here is my one point, and here's some arguments for it. But using the concept of does it follow, I had to stop right at the beginning and say, does this argument follow? Like, the main argument of the government was we have to get people out of the car. There is no real reason given as to why we had to get people out of the car, and actually the opposition missed out on the whole aspect of the freedom to do whatever they like about the car, or take public transit. But they did the whole pile of other stuff. So the actual debate turned out to be a one-horse argument. Okay. Argument-free one-horse argument. And the main idea put forward by the government was never actually rationalized or identified as being, this is something that is necessary. So the Prime Minister had a fairly unusual approach. He had one argument and 8 pieces of proof, or 8 identifiers that actually came close to proving the argument that people would benefit from a free transit system. Several of them were actually duplicates. I mean, green was a big one, and safety, with people being on public transit, being safer, and so on and so on. It was all assertions, and it didn't really come down to anything that proved the point. So my approach for does it follow, and does this argument prove the definition as set up by the government, didn't really follow the Prime Minister. The Leader of the Opposition was a little slow to get going, but picked up some good points on the way. I think that she was just making stuff up, but then she got into the mood of things, and it actually started to make a lot more sense. And towards the end, like the last 3 or 4 minutes, it became really solid, good opposition stuff. I think what you could have done is pointed out that the government's arguments were they're unconventional, and it didn't really make much difference what they were arguing about, because it didn't really prove the point. But that came in your summation, and that really was where you made everything up. Not made everything up, but you made a lot more points there. Going back to the member of government, I'm not sure whether it was just confused or whether there were actually contradictions in here. Certainly, the Prime Minister said that we're going to get all this money, all the $6 billion, because that's what some agency said is lost every year. And then the member of government said, well, no, actually, the government's going to give us this money. So there's a fair amount of maybe contradiction in there. Certainly there was a negative teamwork effect because he was arguing against what the Prime Minister was coming out with. And we did actually get some specifics, but they didn't really prove a great deal of the government's points. So, although the member of government did actually deal with the financial cost of things, and as I say, one was argued against the Prime Minister. Now, the member of the opposition, when he finally got the clock to work, or ignored it, really did do the debate. The member of the opposition went through each point and highlighted everything that was wrong about the government's arguments and just killed each one. Just snapped in there, killed it, killed it, killed it, killed it. So really fantastic, well argued, totally annihilated the government. Sorry guys. And what is this? I didn't take any points off you as a member of the opposition, you coming out with more points of your own to disprove this, because you had enough ammunition there to kill what the government was trying to argue. Now, the summations, Margie, you killed it. Like, the whole thing that I was saying tonight, does it follow? She highlighted that what the government was saying didn't follow. Killed it. Really? Does it follow that point A, B, and C makes sense as far as free public transit is concerned? She argued that it didn't. And that was another, it was a really good summation. And for the Prime Minister, still at the summation, it was, we must get people out of the car. There's really no reason why people had to get out of the car per se. The arguments by the opposition null and voided most of those. And I think the opposition did what they needed to ensure that the government didn't really have much left at the end of the day. So, guess who won, guys?
Draw.
Yeah, very close. I gave the, well, both Michael and I gave the debate to the opposition, and the best speaker was Dave. Thank you very much. Welcome all the way, 62 to 28.
Thank you. Yes.
And we have in here fancy trophies here, and one is for the public vote and the audience vote, and one is for the adjudicators vote. And
before we even do that, can I just say, Dave got best debater. If you didn't hear that, Dave.
And as we've heard, the adjudicator went with the opposition as the winner of tonight's debate, and the public vote or audience vote, it was also in favor of the opposition, 14-4. So if we could have both members of the opposition come up to accept the trophies.